Do I need this? Okay, fine. Please, fine. So, good morning, and thanks for coming along to see this talk. This talk is sort of threats, actors, and capabilities. So it's going to be oriented towards it's a security talk, and sort of about the security risks that face mainly human rights activists, and I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of specific threats and actors in the region. My name is Morgan. For those who aren't aware, I'm currently the Director of Security at First Look Media, which is probably its most famous product is The Intercept. It's sort of best known for reporting and publishing documents that were leaked by this man, Edward Snowden. So it's sort of Glenn Greenwald, Laura Poitras, Jeremy Scahill, and so forth. I currently worry about their manifold security concerns, which is a completely stressless job. Prior to this, I was senior security engineer at Google for 6 years, and I worked as a penetration tester for a firm called Security Assessment. Security firms love having really bland names for some reason, like it's really reassuring. So like there's a lot of them, sort of security assessment, that sort of thing. I also sort of have affiliations with a number of organizations. A lot of the work that was done in this presentation was done in affiliation with Citizen Lab out of the University of Toronto. Some of it was also done with the Electronic Frontier Foundation in San Francisco. I also advise the Freedom of the Press Foundations and UNICRI, which is United Nations Interregional Crime and Justice Institute. So a lot of this talk is actually going to be sort of around surveillance software. Because of my background, which is a security engineer, I will probably use sort of terms like surveillance software, implant, and malware almost interchangeably. I'm presuming most people in the audience will be loosely familiar with these concepts, largely based on kind of stuff like this, right? Like most people have been on the internet for any period of time who probably learned to have sort of this sort of cursory ambient worry about viruses and malware and the like. What I'm actually going to be talking about today, so when people ask me sort of what malware is, I like to tell them that it's sort of any software that shows up on your computer without an end user license agreement. So if you can click on it to say, yes, I want to install this, then it's malware. But for the purposes of this discussion, we're talking about software that essentially records stuff that people do on their computers. Documents they type, conversations they have, communication, video chat, and so on and so forth. I mean, largely all the things that you might want to surveil of someone's online action. Now, has gone mobile, and obviously so has government spying. And so a lot for mobile platforms. And I've seen suites of commercial software available for sale to law enforcement that offer spying capabilities on Android and Windows Mobile. They support all phones people are commonly going to use, and they provide all sorts of interesting capabilities. Logging of phone calls and text messages, usefully tracking of user location by the GPS of the phone. And probably most creepily, the ability to hot mic the phone. And so, the phone sort of still looks like this, but it's ambiently recording everything around itself. Which kind of was sort of odd doing research on this, because as I was sort of looking through sort of a decompilation of the code for this particular type of implant, the actual function that the developer had used was called spy call. And when I looked at it and realized what this did, it sort of led to this odd dissonance between myself and this device, which I'm quite close to. So, I wake up in the morning and like lots of tech addicts, I get straight on Twitter and, and all of a sudden I found myself looking at this and I was like, maybe I should put this in the freezer. And then all of a sudden I was like, no, I've become one of those people. So yeah, this talk's gonna be a lot about really cheerful stuff. I have a sort of a background in doing malware research. And so probably the last really big thing that I did was I released an analysis. So I released for download a bunch of spy software that was used by primarily the GCHQ, which is Britain's communications surveillance establishment, the sort of equivalent of the NSA. And it was used in attacks on the European Union and Belgium by the Five Eyes. And so I released this through the Intercept. Now, this attack got a sort of considerable amount of press because there were some people who felt that, you know, the Five Eyes in the UK, particularly spying on their close allies in the European Parliament and also Belgium, was a little beyond the pale. Now, because of the amount of press like this type of attention has got, it's kind of oddly skewed people's perceptions of threat and risk. Now, for people in this room, the NSA and the GCHQ are probably not your biggest threat. Probably, maybe, I don't know. Maybe you guys have stacks of ex-Soviet nukes that I'm unaware of. But again, you know. But what I wanted to do is I actually wanted to sort of discuss risk and threat in a way that I thought would help people with their security problems rather than actually hinder them. So most people model threat really, really badly. And it's kind of like we actually, and this isn't just online, this is in real life, right? This is why we're worried about terrorists, but not drunk drivers. We're worried about getting Ebola, but not heart disease. You know, because we're worried about like really visceral things that are news. And so I've spent close to 2 decades now worrying about security problems. I've spent a lot of time tracking nation-state attacks against high-risk users. So I have a very granular understanding of what a lot of these types of threats look like, and actually the sort of the frequency of them. And that means, you know, because of the news, you know, you get people who are like, so I read this thing about the NSA the other day, and now I am super worried about all of the low-level firmware on my computer being infected by the American government. Can you help me check for it? Like, do you have outstanding operations that you are committing against the American government? No. Like, I mean, is there any reason why you would think that you'd be targeting an article? And then that's, yeah, this does happen. And so, I mean, another interesting exploits, right? One, your cellular phone, which the vendor creates. So this phone is actually at least a system, right? And it's iOS. A Qualcomm signaling radio stuff. You know, now, I haven't actually watched the show, but as far as I can tell, for like 6 seasons, he just ties people to chairs and tortures them, right? And this is sort of like the final end of what actually happens if, you know, the information that the state wants, or whenever you're targeted, they can't get it. This is sort of like the final end of what could happen. Now, this is really, really expensive because you need, you know, in theory, I mean, you need black sites, you need people that are willing to pull out other people's teeth, and then it's politically difficult. Like, you get Obama standing up on television, and you're like, oh, I'm sorry, we tortured some folks. You know, they don't actually, you know, leaders generally don't like admitting to torture, and then you get people from this kind of crowd, really human rights activists, and it's a nightmare, right? And I'm not actually an expert in information extraction through torture, so we're not going to dwell on this type of action anymore. But what I'm going to get into is I want to discuss now we've talked about the sort of different types of actors that you're sort of worrying about in your security model. What I want to do now is actually talk about the players, like who has these capabilities. Because now you know the types of attack that might be brought to bear against you. Chances are you probably know who you're worried about. So let's talk about what those people can actually do. So this is the GCHQ, and this is actually, I believe, outside Cheltenham, and this is a drawing by Banksy. This is sort of a British graffiti artist. So this is a phone booth with a bunch of government spooks, you know, attached to the phone booth. Everyone's heard of the National Security Agency, obviously. So these are the high-end actors, right? And so this is the Five Eyes. This is Israel. Just sort of a top-end actors. I mean, does this country have a large military-industrial complex? Do they have a Silicon Valley, a large gaming industry, perhaps? But like, this sort of stuff doesn't spring up overnight, right? Like, this is 50-year ramp-up times to developing this type of capability. Not so much in sort of software, but in terms of like a culture, right? So they make, artisanal, small batch, bespoke surveillance software, coded themselves in-house, and the people that write it are probably fed, smoothies and get facials while they write their government malware. It's all very lush. You've got a kind of a second tier, right? And these are governments that have cash, but don't necessarily traditionally have the in-house capability to create these sorts of tools, right? Like they've just over the last few years realized they really want them. This is highly desirable. So what they're going to do is they're going to buy them. And so primarily what this does is it means that governments are purchasing primarily from Western contractors. So, people gain this capability by working for Western governments. Then they leave, set up private companies because they actually want to make money, and then start selling this type of technology to other governments. And so there's this type of middle tier. It's a commercial market. This type of software is frequently sold to law enforcement, intelligence agencies in countries that don't have the capability to write this stuff themselves. And occasionally, it kind of grows. You sort of see it sold to security companies that will do things which might be considered dubiously ethical. And this type of actor sort of is a pay-for-tools strata of actor. After this, what you have is a strata that I'm calling for the purposes here, cyber mercenaries. So you'll get groups, and I've seen groups in India, Bangladesh, like Leo Impact and Appen and that sort of thing, that you can hire, and they actually have websites, right? You can hire ethical hackers as digital private investigators. And you have to think a little bit about what that actually means. So frequently what that means is, say you have a court case and you really want to know what the other person is holding. You hire these digital private investigators for you, and they'll hack the opposing counsel and steal all their emails and documents and give them to you, right? I mean, these guys are a legitimate risk, especially for people that are bringing sort of important suits against government actors. Like we've seen the use of these players in areas like Angola and so forth. So you don't even really want to pay for tools, right? This is a pay per job style scenario, right? Like you don't have an infrastructure to build your own tools. You don't actually really buy these tools as a service, but you have stuff that you need done right now. And then there's one that, like, this is what the security industry has traditionally been really worried about, right? And this is cybercrime. And this is sort of the Russian business network. These are people who like to steal banking logins en masse and that sort of thing. And you're essentially monetizing cybercrime on the internet. Now, this is all about getting paid. So for all of these actors, actually, the equation is kind of the same. And that's the resources that the attacker has versus the amount of money it'll cost to carry out an attack versus the value of the target. And there's kind of there's a strata that doesn't really fit this. And that's the sort of hacktivists and black hats, right? And that's because these people operate largely based on ideology. And their motivations are personal, frequently petty, in the case of black hats. And they're frustrating because you know what type of research expenditure this person will stop going to do. As a former corporate security person, I found with a government attacker, you generally know what they want, what they're trying to get, how much effort they'll go to get it. With the sort of the dedicated black hat or hacktivist, this is a lot more nebulous. So generally I put this group into, like, you should just not piss off people in that last category. With the former category, you may not have a choice based on the type of work that you're doing. But this is all, a sort of a very businessy transaction, right? Like, this is in some ways how you need to think about security. How efficient can we make these attacks against our targets? How much do they cost? And you sort of do. It's a fantastic idea. It performs a very specific function. It won't solve all your operational security worries. So I kind of want to finish before I want people to ask questions and that sort of thing. But I want people to start thinking basically into one thing, like, think not what your adversary could do, but rather know what they must do, right? So Sure, you can be freaked out about spies, space aliens, drones, baseband exploits, robots from the future, and that sort of thing. But if you think a lot specifically about what you're trying to protect, that's a great place to start. So yeah, I hope that occasionally the talks that I give and the sort of like I come to you with problems, not solutions kind of into things. I hope I haven't really done that today. So yeah, if people have questions, I'm here. Anyone? I mean, don't be shy, because generally what happens when I give these sorts of talks is that people sit there silently, and then I get off stage, and there's like a line of people who are like, so I didn't really want to say anything. Yeah.
I mean, I'm just really curious because I actually tracked down the YouTube part. So in Malaysia, I actually did that.
Yeah.
I just didn't know where it was. But now what's happened is that now people start encrypting traffic.
Right.
So I'm just wondering, is it possible to do a man in the middle on traffic that's encrypted without you not knowing?
So it is, the question you get to now, I mean, it is under variable circumstances. It becomes more difficult and more expensive. Like once traffic is encrypted, the circumstances under which you can attempt to attack that encrypted tunnel are based on a variety of environmental factors. For instance, say you were watching YouTube using a Chrome browser. YouTube is a Google property. Google also distributes Chrome. They actually know what their properties are supposed to look like. So functionally, it should actually be incredibly difficult to attack that. Having said that, to use another example, if you were using, browser X and looking at a random property online, and your government actually had the capability to coerce sort of a key signing authority for their country, so one of the pillars of trust, the centralized model of encryption online, then it is indeed possible that they could read this encrypted traffic. So I mean, again, like encryption isn't a universal panacea. It's a really good idea, and you should definitely be using it. But yeah, let's see. We can talk more about that afterwards if you like. But that's sort of a reasonable answer to it. Hi.
Some of the ways that you were mentioning about real world ways that people could securely not create this much data or finding it in physical places. Don't you think that a lot of what's happening right now is actually away from those strategies? And do you think there will be a turning point where people go away from storing things on the cloud or creating on their data?
Yes, but yeah, other people couldn't. So what the question was, to get this right, the question was that there's, isn't there a move, away from storing things in the cloud and doing things online and that sort of thing. Is that just clear?
Yeah, do you think things are moving more that direction?
I've sort of. I think there's definitely a lot more discussion about things moving in that direction. Like I've done a few journalist security conferences recently where I've had journalists say things like, "Oh, we need to move back to the old school way, right? Where we meet sources in a darkened garage, and probably wearing a trench coat." And the issue I have with that is I'm like, right, and you made sure you both drove there in a car that doesn't have GPS, right? And you left your phones at home and your Fitbits and so there's difficulty in trying to roll back time, obviously, right? And there's an expedience to online communication, especially, I mean, is meeting a source in person really safer for them, for the source? Probably not. But I mean, there's definitely a massive and powerful international discussion about whether or not we should be moving away to storing data in clouds. Should countries have local clouds, decentralization, data localization? There's even sort of panels and debates on this at this conference. So I think that discussion is definitely occurring in a really important way at a macro level. And there's, again, a lot of this boils down to convenience. So I have a colleague with whom, a partner in crime, if you will, with whom I've written many papers on state spying, and he laments my love of Google Docs. it boggles his mind because he's writing stuff on state spying. Why are you writing this in Google Docs? It's just so convenient. Like, you're in Italy, I'm here. Like, you want to send files back and forth between us over encrypted email. What is this, the 90s? So I mean, I know I should be doing that, but it's so annoying. And so, like, there's that friction between convenience and security that I think a lot of communities that have a very real reason to have these discussions like this one are actually having those discussions right now. It's, well, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. Maybe we should be doing that. And like, yeah, but the alternative sucks. I really want to use the cloud. And so that's sort of basically, this is sort of how the discussion is sort of going these days. Colin.
So what I liked is this sense of a cost model and handling these sorts of threat modeling in terms of
Capitalism can apply movie.
So I was wondering if you could actually sort of readdress 3 points within the cost model. They're all the same thing in the spectrum. Baseband exploits, coercing an SSLCA to issue fake certs, and then the Adobe Flash Player pop-up thing. Could you sort of reframe those within that cost model?
Oh, okay. So, Colin wants me to reframe as a sort of a cost or a price point. What was it? It was the cost of coercing a certificate of authority to give you the type of key that would allow you to read encrypted traffic, or a certain type of encrypted traffic. The cost of a baseband exploit and sort of the Adobe for a fake flash installer.
And then with respect to this threat model.
With respect to the threat model. So, the use of, like, we'll talk about baseband exploits for a second first. So this is a certain type of zero-day, specialized type of zero-day exploit, right? These are actually quite expensive. There's been significant discussion about them in certain types of communities over the last couple of years, particularly the sale of exploits by researchers to government, which has actually led to a lot of people thinking that they're constantly targeted by zero-day exploits all the time. These are actually reasonably expensive, and every time you use them, you have to consider them burned. So as a sort of a general price point, like a zero-day exploit in Chrome would probably be about $300,000 US, according to prices that I've been privy to recently. And so, I mean, again, this on the scale, like, there's the, this is Mallory, this is the active attacker, and this costs money. Now, and like baseband exploits, quite expensive. They're very bespoke. There's not many people selling them. The likelihood that you'll be targeted one because you might be kind of interesting to the government is highly unlikely. Like, you would probably definitely have to be a person of interest. And so, there's multiple dollar signs on this. The cost of coercing a certificate of authority inside your country, I mean, again, this actually speaks to a blended landscape, right? Because what you're essentially doing is you're augmenting the capabilities of Eve, right? Like, your abilities to collect encrypted traffic are already there and they're basically free. What you're trying to do now is, I guess, read it, right? So you want to coerce people that hold keys. If they're inside your country, then this can actually be a relatively cheap thing to do. It can involve a specific type of threatening legal document. However, it might also involve Jack Bauer, depending on how you actually operate. So, I mean, the costs can be different. It can actually be incredibly cheap. However, if your country, the person you're trying to coerce is not inside your country, then what you do is now you actually have a situation like Mallory. And this actually happened where the Iranian government broke in. To read Google traffic that they were intercepting, well, not just Google, I think it was Google, Facebook, and a variety of other people they were intercepting in country. So it's a sort of complex multi-stage thing, and at that point, it does actually start to cost resource, right? And the final one is, these are kind of curly, Colin. The final one is, Colin was sort of asking about that fake Flash Player pop-up that we saw. Now, the interesting thing there is that it's actually sort of a cheap way of carrying out a certain type of attack, and so this is Mallory, this is an active team, this costs money in terms of this rig, right? Like, you you're basically intercepting people's traffic and then injecting things into it. However, in this case, you're actually attempting to socially engineer the user. It will work even if people have been trained not to be aware of these types of things. Because, I mean, for instance, everybody in this room cares about security to some extent, which is why they're in this talk. They've probably been given a lecture on not clicking on strange attachments in unsolicited emails. I got an email which said, hey, you're awesome, you're really great, so you give this talk, you're such dapper clothing. You know, we'd really like you to come to our conference and we're prepared to offer you a $5,000 speaking fee in business class flights. And we'll put you up a 5-star. Like, finally, the recognition I deserve. You know? And you know, it becomes very, very tempting to actually click on this sort of thing. Like, I mean, it's largely about understanding the motivations of your target, right? Like in that sense, you know, you play on a sense of entitlement and a likelihood that you know, someone who does these conferences actually receives a lot of legitimate emails inviting to the conferences. So, I mean, that sort of thing does work. It is reasonably cheap to perform in a sort of broad way. Obviously, you know, if that's how you're planning on compromising a specific individual, you know, then it becomes more expensive because you're going to start collecting information about that individual. Like your success in this is based on largely on how well you know your target. And so popping someone up an Adobe Flash update is a pretty generic way of trying to do this. I would describe it on the sort of the cheaper end of the spectrum. I think there's a sort of a reasonable suggestion that someone might be like, oh, no, I'm not going to do that. So yeah, I hope that sort of answers your questions. But as I said, once you start getting into it, as I said, it does sort of it's a blended landscape. Hi.
Hi. Thinking about this in the Southeast Asian context, governments.
Right.
It seems like we have a lot of. Seems like we have a lot of governments who are in the sort of second tier, and maybe the kind of tier below. So I'm wondering, as these economies continue to develop, is it inevitable that they should progress up that scale and seek to start creating their own software? Or, you know, where do you see this going as these governments grow and seek to acquire more resources? And how can those institutions try to stop them from doing that? You know, what should we do here strategically?
Why do you hate legitimate surveillance? Do you want to list it? No, so I see this as a two-part question, right? So one is, it was basically like, you know, most of the governments in the Southeast Asian context fit into a second tier, this sort of second tier of purchasing tools. And the second one was, you know, sort of, do we see it as inevitable as more and more governments will sort of create bespoke tools for surveillance purposes? And so the first question I think is interesting. Like we've certainly seen governments in this area, as I said, sort of Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, purchasing commercial surveillance tools from Western vendors for these ends. Having said that, Vietnam actually has, so they have a security conference called VNSEC. They actually have a couple of different groups of sort of security researchers that are reasonably high profile. They have a couple of antivirus companies. They have a gaming industry. All of a sudden, if you actually start looking through like Microsoft advisories for Vietnamese researchers, you'll actually see that there's people developing high-end exploit and that sort of thing, which sort of gets sold throughout the region. So it's not all the countries in this region are necessarily in the second tier, right? As to the second question, like I think there is an inevitability of in-house tool development. However, that's actually just because it becomes cheaper to develop these things, right? So I mean, originally as the popularity of these types of tools increases, you know, sort of more tools for the creation of these tools actually start being created, right? So a lot of stuff that used to be done manually can now be done in automated fashion, and it actually becomes cheaper for people to actually start rolling out this type of capability themselves. So I think we'll definitely see more of that. That's because the price point of like boutique capability starts driving down over time, right? So, you know, an interesting way to look at it might be at the rate at which attacks that are considered to be academic are implemented. So for instance, say NSA, maybe 2 or 3 years ahead of public, like what's known. Whereas if you take, you know, sort of other countries with less money, fewer comp-sci grad students or this type of thing, the rate at which they implement theoretical academic attacks might be actually like 5 or 6 years after, you know, these things have first become public. So I think that will probably stay sort of static based on the resources of the country. However, it is becoming cheaper and cheaper to write this sort of thing in certain areas. So yeah, I mean, I think the countries in this region will inevitably be enhancing their capabilities, which has been I guess an outcome of the Snowden revelations that I did not initially anticipate, which is that it's actually done a lot of great things for people selling surveillance technology. Because there's been this like, the NSA has all these toys. We need more budget. We got to get some of this. Like, come on, guys. And I mean, that's a real thing, and that's been happening. So I mean, I think that there'll definitely be there's sort of a definite inevitable increase in the sort of desire for surveillance capabilities in the region. Please.
Hi. I'm Digi from Access. First Look is still releasing original reporting based on the Snowden files. Are there steps that First Look is taking as a news organization that are unique to sort of having that responsibility of having those documents that people in this room may not be able to do, or is it just a combination of deploying all of the tools that are available to your typical news organization or nonprofit? You know, for example, the Gemalto story that came out recently, which you were involved in, it's amazing to me that these files are still there and they're still being discovered and released. And so I'm just curious, like, and from that, are there any lessons that people who aren't necessarily funded by the Omidyar can take to protect themselves?
That's a really good question. Some of it I'm not going to answer. And like, so the question is kind of, so my organization is publishing and doing original reporting on the Snowden documents, which we're still releasing more of. He mentioned the Gemalto attack story recently, and this was when it was shown that the NSA and GCHQ had compromised the world's largest SIM card manufacturer in order to just sort of steal the keys, the SIM cards, which sort of, you know, greatly enhances their cellular surveillance capabilities. And so his question was, you know, have we done anything special in order to, you know, because there's obviously so much sensitivity around some of the documents that we hold and so forth. And then, you know, what advice can I give to sort of other organizations, things like human rights and journalism and investigative research and reporting? So the answer is, yeah, there's definitely been a bunch of specialized and indeed custom things that have been done at First Look. Like I would hope so. Otherwise, maybe my job is giving talks rather than doing security work. But yeah, we actually have a security team at First Look, and that actually enables you. I mean, security is not about tools, right? Security is about procedures and infrastructure and, you know, software and tool chains, and it's about a variety of things. And so this actually sort of gets in many ways to the heart of what I was trying to do here, is that I actually feel that this community does have a very tool-based approach to security, right? Which I think is because it means that you don't sort of obviates the need to have specialized resource, right? Which I think we're very uncomfortable recommending that people need. I mean, what we're doing at First Look is we actually have security engineers, not not people who have kind of an interest in security, but actually a background in human rights, but they learn how to use PGP. Like, no, like, I mean, I spent 5 years breaking into computers for money, and then I spent 6 years in the Google School. We have actual security engineers, right? And I think that this is, I would love to see more organizations devote money and resource to that, which is kind of an ugly thing to say, because what people really want to hear is that the open source community should write a few more tools, and they just need to have better UX, and then everything's going to be great. And that's just not true. And so, I mean, I think that, and if I wanted to be cynical, I could say that it's probably easier to get $200,000 to pay for a conference and fly a bunch of people into a room to have a discussion about security than it is to pay for security software. If I was being really cynical, but I have a phone, so I mean, what I think that organizations need to do is sure, I mean, I think there's a lot of value in education. So, I mean, internally at First Look, we, you know, all of our internal email is PGP encrypted. OTR is the default method that everyone chats. All of our phone calls are using Signal. We also do a lot more stuff that I wouldn't necessarily recommend that organizations do without dedicated security resource. Now, that's not available to some groups, for sure. It is available to others. For instance, I have been fighting this fight with regard to news organizations, and that many news organizations do not have dedicated security resource, and yet they're owned by Condé Nast or Rupert Murdoch, or, you know, and these are actually giant international conglomerates that could be doing a lot more to protect their users. So I think in some ways it involves like a perspective shift on how we actually see security, rather than, you know, security is using Tor. But how that's done in a cost-effective manner is definitely challenging. Please.
Thanks for the talk and congratulations on a very damp suit.
Thank you.
Given that suit, I was wondering, do you have any magic tricks for getting small organizations, you know, maybe based in, you know, London or New York or wherever, places where they feel they're not a direct threat, and to understand the threats that they may face from the government threats that they may face, say for instance, if they're working on with human rights activists in Syria. Do you have any tricks to basically get them to understand that risk and start looking at for these kind of solutions without them just thinking that you're the kind of person that goes to freezer?
Right. And I did admit to being the kind of person in front of the freezer. So yeah, the question was, you know, what do you say to organizations that are working in probably comparably safe geographic locations, say, you know, the UK or the US or something, and they're working with groups in potential hotspots like Syria and that sort of thing. How do you convince these groups that, you know, sort of security is really important without sounding like a paranoid nut? So I mean, I think this is you know, really sort of hits the nail on the head, I think, a lot for this community. I actually had a very visceral real world example of this, right? I was giving a talk a little bit like this one, but actually a lot more focused on actually the nuts and bolts of malware and government spying and how it actually works. And I had a gentleman walk up to me after the talk, and he said, "I think that happened to me." I was like, "What happened?" He's like, "Yeah, so I got this email, and it was apparently about this human rights report on China, and, you know, I opened it, and then like it was just like the document was blank and nothing happened, and then I just sort of ignored it, but I'm just sort of thinking about it, and I had a look, and I was like, oh wow, this is actually Chinese government malware. Like you're legitimate. What do you do?" And it turned out that he was a lawyer, and sort of he prosecuting human rights abuses, or trying to do so, was actually some of his bailiwick. He was actually very unconcerned that this had happened. It's like, oh, what does that mean? And this is kind of a thing. Like, you seem very, very relaxed about this. And actually, in order to get through to him, I was like, so as a lawyer, would you not just be furious if you found out that the Chinese government had sent spies to your office physically to break in and then go through your filing cabinet? Looking outrageous. It's like, that's exactly what's happened. Like, wait, you know. So I mean, like even actually explaining to people what the significance of being targeted in this manner is can actually be challenging. And I think, I mean, protecting sources or you know, people, protecting the people that you're supposed to be trying to protect or help is a very interesting problem, especially in areas where operational security failures on your part might have drastic consequences on their end. I think we're getting better at that as a community. I really do. I mean, I think that there's probably quite a lot of practical examples. I think staying away from freezer phone mentality is really important, because it not just makes you sound paranoid, it's also kind of paralyzing, right? Because then people are like, well, I'd love to do something, but I heard that the NSA has actually put implants in all of my pets' brains. So like, what can I really do at this stage? Like, I'm just going to ignore this, right? The way I try to do this is to get people to I guess judge how much security willingness I think an organization or a group of people has, and then try to pitch to that rather than being like, I am going to drag these people kicking and screaming through blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, maybe what I can do is sort of go in and be like, well, you guys are all in Palestine and you drive through Israeli checkpoints constantly. Have you thought about just encrypting your computers and phones, right? And then that's like a one-day, one-off thing. I mean, so I guess like sort of picking the security willingness of the organization and trying to pitch what you think you can get done is probably a great first step. Anyway, yes.
Is Amnesty a tool that was released recently by Amnesty and a group of other organizations, maybe Citizen Lab, to scan this country? Recently, Amnesty and a few other groups released some scanning software you can use to basically look for things like Hacking Team, Fisher, like Yammer. Do you recommend that? And are there other tools that you guys are developing that will look at those basic kind of things?
So no tool is going to do everything for you, which is the point. So you're talking about Detect, right? Now Detect is actually an interesting tool. Detect is a very specialized tool for doing a very specialized thing. Detect is designed to see if your computer, your Windows computer, is infected with Fisher or remote control system, which is written by Hacking Team. There's no harm in using this tool. You simply have to know what using it actually means. And it suggests to you at this specific moment in time that your computer is not infected by these two specific strains of lawful intercept malware that are used by governments. That doesn't say that you're fine. It doesn't say that you will be fine in the future, right? Like it's simply like it's like getting a blood test for two very specific diseases right now. So you're like, well, I went to this country. Do I have West Nile virus? You don't. So I mean, like I think using Detect is very useful if you have a very specific worry, and I think that's you got knowing why you're using the tools you're using is so important. Which I think is sort of something I've been trying to emphasize during this talk. So yeah, I mean, Detect is useful for checking for that specific type of malware. Are there any other tools that I recommend? I mean, to be honest, I'm not sure I recommend any tools that aren't already being recommended by the many sort of capable digital security trainers in this space. Because obviously, when you're deciding to recommend a tool, there's this sort of balance of what does it do versus how hard is it to use. Oh wait, no, there is one that I really like. I try to get everyone to use. Let's see if I can do it. It's on my phone actually, and I love it specifically because this is great. So it has the best user interface of any security product I have ever seen. This, you can see my phone, it's currently off, right? I hit this button, doing something really technical right here. Oh my God, it asks, wants me to pay. I've run out of my subscription. Basically what this is this is a VPN software, and it has one button, and the button does on and off, which is freaking fantastic. So actually, when people are like, oh, you should use a VPN, that's actually a great idea. And a VPN is an encrypted tunnel. So say you don't trust the Wi-Fi in the hotel or airport or wherever else you're staying, you can use this virtual private tunnel, which will tunnel you out somewhere on the internet in an encrypted manner. That's a good idea. You should use these things. This, like, getting people to set them up and configure them, etc., has historically been an awful drag. I don't like doing it on a phone. This was awesome because you have an on-off button and it just goes. The downside is it does cost, I believe, $2 a month, which I have discovered that I have just stopped paying. But I actually think that's actually not a bad price to pay for this. It's called Freedom, or Freedom with an E on the end. So Freedom. So yeah, I was gonna say, like, in terms of a tool that I actually don't feel, I know the guys that wrote it as well, you know, they're pretty sane. So I mean, I guess I am generally disinclined to recommend tools, but that's not a bad one as things go. All right, sure.
Yeah. Given that governments, given that a certain government controls all mobile providers, and there's no law, you know, that can be enforced against invasion of privacy, is there any way to secure a smartphone?
Buy an iPhone. That's a really tough problem, right? Because is there any way to secure a smartphone? Like the difficulty is that you don't have much control over your phone. So I mean, in some ways, Linux is infinitely securable, which is infinitely tinkerable with. That's not necessarily right. As anyone in this room who's a long-term Linux user knows, you can spend forever tinkering with your Linux box. And the value, so it's hard because frequently your problem is that your mobile service provider is not working in your best interest from a privacy standpoint. I think it was actually the quote that, you know, sort of information is the new oil or something like that was actually a Verizon executive, right? And, you know, in aggregate, of course, not, you know, detailed manner, but, you know, you can tell advertising companies that, yeah, we've learned from, you know, the people that access our cellular towers with their phones that, you know, this neighborhood is largely African American between the ages of 20 and 35 and 62% male. You know, right? Like, I mean, they do keep a certain amount of granular data on you, on your movements and that sort of thing. And there's no real, I can't think of a single, like, privacy-friendly mobile provider. Like, I don't think there is one that's actually come out and said, like, yeah, we fight for the users. That's a tough problem, right? Like, and that has led many people I know to suggest that the mobile security problem is untenable. So, I mean, having said that, there's the other side of things. I think one of the most interesting battles to come out of the Snowden revelations is actually that's occurring between US intelligence and law enforcement and primarily Apple, actually. Because Apple recently, in a bewilderingly awesome move, they made iMessage end-to-end encrypted. Now, iMessage is like the default messaging app on your iPhone, right? It's what handles your text messages and all that sort of thing. So it's got some problems, like you can't verify keys and blah, blah, blah. So it doesn't pass the sort of the paranoid crypto nerd test. But what that means is that all of a sudden you've got 500 million users that are using end-to-end encrypted messaging. It's crazy. You can see why the US government is like, right? And there was a big fight going on at the moment where, you know, FBI director has been like, Apple is helping the terrorists. And they're trying to get them to change the software really, really, really hard because it's actually real crypto on a commodity device and it's just transparent to the users. So I mean, that's actually a really interesting fight to watch to unfold. So I mean, yeah, the cellular problem is a hard one, and I mean, in a lot of ways, this is a toaster, right? You buy an appliance and you get a mobile computing experience, right? It is not really a general purpose computing device as we understand it. And so there's some good things and some bad things with that. The bad things is obviously that, you know, Apple are kind of jerks about their walled garden thing. Your mobile service providers are terrible, awful people that want to give all of your data to governments and advertisers. Having said that, in the case of Apple and iMessage, you actually have a reasonably widely distributed, easy to use encrypted messaging platform that they haven't even told users it's encrypted. It just is. And that's actually a great way to get people to use encrypted communications. So, all right, I think I'm going to wrap this up now. Thank you all for coming, and I'll be around if you want to talk or ask questions. I'll be the person in the suit with dreadlocks.